Here we go. Humanities 101 and NACHOS reminds you that you are enough. Now we join Dr. Dutch with the neuro-affirming conversation hour for outreach and support.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you are. It is autumn again. And this is the neuro-affirming conversation hour for outreach and support. So what does autumn mean? The days are getting shorter. The light is turning golden. And there's that familiar crispness in the air, that unmistakable signal that the earth itself is exhaling. The sunlight arrives later now. Leaves drift loose from their branches, and even the birds seem to sing with a quieter confidence, as if they know something we've forgotten. Every year, this season reminds us to return to the idea that change isn't an interruption. It's a pattern. The world keeps teaching us that nothing living holds still for long. Trees release what no longer serves them. Rivers reroute after storms, and even the wind changes its mind. And maybe that's the truest wisdom, is learning how to move with it all rather than resist it. Autumn calls us to slow down, not as punishment, but as permission. It's nature's way of telling us to recalibrate, to find our own rhythm again after the long, bright push of summer. There's a strange beauty in this shift. Things are dying back, yes, but there's also preparing for what's next. Beneath the fallen leaves, seeds are waiting. Roots are deepening. What looks like loss is actually renewal in disguise. And for those of us that live with neurodivergent minds, constantly adapting, recharging, masking, unmasking, growing, and regrouping, that truth can feel especially profound. We know what it means to need cycles, to move through seasons of burnout and recovery, overstimulation and rest. Autumn, in its honesty, mirrors what our bodies and brains have been saying all along. There is no shame in needing to pause. There is wisdom in it. The natural world doesn't apologize for changing. The sky doesn't say sorry for darkening early. The trees don't question whether they're being productive enough as they shed their leaves. They just are. They trust the process that has held them for millennia, the rhythm that says you cannot bloom all year round. And maybe that's the lesson for us this week. Maybe autumn is the season that invites us to honor the ebbs as much as the flow, the quiet as much as the crescendo, to see rest not as a retreat, but as a rehearsal, the deep inhale before the next act of becoming. So as the days shorten and the air cools, let's take a cue from the maples and the geese and the late setting sun. Let's learn to let go, to slow down, and to listen for the patterns that have always been there. The patterns that remind us that change isn't the enemy of stability. It's the heartbeat of it. And so as we step deeper into autumn's embrace, we shift our focus from the quiet acceptance of change into a moment of harvest, gratitude, and reflection. When the leaves begin their fall and the days draw shorter, it is more than meteorological event. It's a signal to pause and to take stock of what has grown, what has served us, and what it's time to release. This time of year echoes an ancient rhythm. People throughout history have marked the harvest as a time not just of gathering food, but of gathering meaning. In countless cultures, harvest festivals have celebrated abundance, community, and the rhythms of life and labor. At its heart, the feast is a ritual of connection. Special foods, special times, shared tables, everything steeped in meaning beyond the mere act of eating. Feasting, as anthropologists remind us, has always been a social glue that binds community. It smooths tensions, forges alliances, creates memories, and nurtures belonging. In this way, autumn invites us into our own kind of feast, not necessarily with roast turkey or pumpkin pie, although I do like to tear into a pumpkin pie, but with an act of gathering ourselves, gathering awareness of how we've changed this year, of what we have harvested in our hearts and minds, and what we're ready to lay down. For those of us living neurodivergent lives, navigating unique rhythms of energy and rest, masking and unmasking, blooming and waiting, this invitation is especially vital because the world often demands that we continuously produce, but nature reminds us we also must pause. Rest is part of the contract, whether we like it or not. So as the days shorten and the air's cool, let's take a cue from the maples. Let's take a cue from those geese. Let's learn to let go. Let's learn to slow and to listen to those patterns. Because remember, that change, that's the heartbeat of that stability. Let's bring our own feast to the table. Let's bring our stories, our growth, our gentle courage, our compassion for ourselves, and our renewed commitment to community. And speaking of feasts and gatherings, let's talk about what happened this past week at the Michigan Disability Empowerment Conference. Because if autumn is a season of harvest and reflection, then the MDEC was our living, breathing feast. This was a day where ideas, stories, and lived experiences came together like a potluck of purpose. Each person brought something different to the table. Some shared hard-won wisdom, others offered visions of innovation, and many simply showed up in the most powerful way possible, as their authentic selves. There in the halls of the University of Michigan Dearborn, you could feel it, the pulse of possibility, the sense that Michigan is building something new, something rooted in inclusion, belonging, and collaboration. It wasn't just a conference. It was a collective act of cultivation. Seeds of policy, education, and community were planted in real time, nurtured by people who know what it means to live through cycles of challenge and change and to still keep showing up. And in that way, the MDEC mirrored autumn perfectly. It reminded us that progress isn't instant. It's harvested over seasons. What we witnessed last Friday was the fruition of months of labor, months of hope, and months of partnership. It was a reminder that empowerment grows not from any single voice, but from a chorus, each voice distinct, yet harmonizing towards a shared vision of a more neuro-affirming Michigan. So as the leaves fall and the winds, and then the year winds down, let's carry the warmth of that day with us. Let's remember that community is our harvest, that collaboration is our feast, and that change, like the fall, is not the end of something, but the beginning of everything that's next. What made Friday powerful as well wasn't just the panels or the presentations. It was the honesty, the willingness to name what so many of us have felt for years, that we can't keep fighting for a system that never truly served us, that returning to normal isn't liberation when the old normal demanded our silence, our compliance, and our burnout. Again and again, in session after session, that truth surfaced. People spoke with courage about the exhaustion of surviving inside broken systems, the systems of education, healthcare, employment, and even advocacy itself. We heard from self-advocates, professionals, and families who have spent years navigating a maze built without us in mind, and we looked one another in the eye and said, we can't go back there. In that old system, we were voiceless. And if it were restored today, we'd still be fighting against it tomorrow. So instead, we talked about what it means to build something new, something that reflects our needs, our wisdom, and our humanity. A system designed not around compliance, but around care. Not around scarcity, but around belonging. That's what began at MDEC, a blueprint, a collective act of imagination and refusal. A moment where people across Michigan said, we've had enough of being included as an afterthought. We're designing on our own table now, and we're designing our own table now. And it wasn't just talk. It is a movement. It was educators rethinking classrooms, advocates reshaping policy languages, families reclaiming hope, and neurodivergent adults mapping what a truly affirming Michigan could look like by 2035. The work began there, and it will continue in our campuses, in our clinics, our homes, and our daily interactions. Because change isn't a one-day event. It's a season as well. And just like autumn, it requires letting go of what's dying so that what's next has room to grow. But as powerful as that last week's conference was, it was never meant to be it, never meant to be an ending. The Michigan Disability Empowerment Conference isn't and never was a destination. It's a launch pad. The conversations we had there and those visions that we shared are already rippling outwards, because the work doesn't stop when the lights go down and the last session ends. The work continues everywhere, in classrooms, boardrooms, libraries, and even living rooms. In the months ahead, we'll be nurturing what began at MDEC, growing it into a truly statewide network of neuro-affirming practice and community. I'll be continuing our quarterly community conversations at the Genesee District Library, where we hold space for late diagnosed adults, families of autistic children, educators, parents, and allies, and the idea of reaffirming neuro-affirmation, one story, one barrier, and one breakthrough at a time. Those gatherings are where the theory meets the neighborhood, where conversation becomes culture. Then on November 11th, I'll be at Kettering University to help launch an institution-wide initiative focused on neuro-affirmation in education and employment. And it's not just a talk. It's the start of a campus-wide, county-wide movement designed to shift culture from accommodation to affirmation, from compliance to compassion. Kettering University will become a model for what happens when we view neurodiversity and neurodivergence not as a deficit to be managed, but as a vital part of the whole process of innovation, creation, and belonging. And a few weeks later, on December 11th, I'll bring that conversation again to Yale, where we will explore the neuro-affirming relational ethic of micro-accommodations and the PB&J framework. that predictability, balance, and joy. We'll talk about what happens when institutions stop asking, how can we help people fit in, and start asking, how can we fit our systems to people? Because that's what micro-accommodation really means. Building environments where human variance is expected, respected, and reflected in every policy and practice. So what comes next is both simple and profound. We keep going. We keep building. We keep gathering at every table available to us, campus tables, conference tables, kitchen tables. And we make sure there's a seat for every brain and every body. The story of Michigan's neuro-affirming future doesn't end at Dearborn. It begins there. And as we move forward, we carry a shared hope to bring the next MDEC to mid-Michigan, particularly Flint, a community whose resilience and courage reminds us why this work matters. By centering the conversation there, we can confront the long-term realities of environmental trauma and lead exposure and how they often manifest as neurodivergence. Expanding the conference to Flint isn't just about geography. It's about justice, ensuring that every part of Michigan has access to neuro-affirming education, care, and opportunity. The leaves may be falling, but something else is taking root, something alive with possibility. Now, if you listen closely, at the MDEC, you could hear it in the rustle of poster boards, the buzz of brainstorming, and the hum of collaboration that filled every corner of the conference hall. It was in the student innovation projects, the next generation of thinkers and doers daring to imagine a more accessible, compassionate world. These weren't just class assignments, they were blueprints for the future, each project a seed of change, planted by students who see neuro-affirming design and disability justice not as a distant goal, but as a responsibility they're ready to shoulder. The quiet determination of their voices wasn't just inspiring, it was proof that the next wave of advocacy and innovation has already begun to grow. And when it came time to celebrate their work, the room was filled with pride and possibility. The Best of Show award went to a designer that developed a framework reset for how parents talk with their children, a project that reimagined everyday language as a tool of empowerment instead of correction. Her work reminds us that inclusion begins in the smallest moments. The words we choose, the tone we set, and the way we listen when someone is trying to tell us who they are and what they need. The Most Likely to Succeed award went to a deceptively simple idea, a bucket hat designed to hold multiple resources for people with disabilities or for those who are unhoused. It was practical, portable, and deeply human, a wearable act of care that said, I see you, and I've thought about what you might need before you have to ask. And the Innovation Challenge winner, the project that captured both heart and imagination, was a low-tech communication system using NFC tags for nonverbal individuals. With just a tap, someone could express needs, emotions, or preferences that otherwise might go unheard. It was a reminder that innovation doesn't always mean high tech. Sometimes the most radical design is the one that restores connection. All 8 entries were remarkable, each one a reflection of empathy translated into action. The judges had a hard time choosing because every project held a spark of brilliance, a vision for how we can make the world not just more accessible, but more human. And that's really at the heart of everything we do, isn't it? Curiosity drives innovation, and innovation drives inclusion. When we stay curious, we stay open. We ask better questions. We notice what's missing, what's broken, and what's waiting to be healed. Curiosity is what bridges the gap between frustration and breakthrough. It's what turns "why doesn't this exist" into, well, What if we build it ourselves? Inclusion at its core isn't a policy or a checklist. It's a creative act. It begins with the courage to imagine something different and the humility to admit we don't have all the answers yet. Belonging grows from that same soil. The shared curiosity of people who care enough to look deeper, to design better, to keep trying. When curiosity becomes culture, innovation follows. And when innovation is guided by empathy, belonging ceases to be an aspiration. It becomes the way we live. And that's what humanities is all about. It's not a subject you master. It's a conversation you join. It's the ongoing dialogue between our questions and our capacity to listen, between the self and the world, between the known and the unknown. In humanities, we don't chase final answers because the moment you claim to have one, you stop learning. We chase understanding. We chase empathy. We chase perspective. Those rare, essential things that remind us what it means to be human in the first place. To study the humanities is to resist the illusion of completion. It's to say there is always more to see, there is always more to ask, and there is surely always more to notice. It's to walk through history's corridors and realize that the people who came before us were asking many of the same questions we still wrestle with today. How do we live well with one another? What does justice look like? How do we make beauty out of suffering? We don't see the answers. We seek them. And in that seeking, we find community. Because the search itself is what binds us together. The journey, the quest. Whether it's through art or philosophy, storytelling or science, every question we ask opens a door to someone else's experience. Every time we sit down at a table of wonder, we make room for another voice. The human experience in all its truest form isn't about conquering life like a checklist. It's about wandering through it, loafing, as Walt Whitman might say, with just enough curiosity to be astonished one more time before we go. It's about walking down a quiet street on a fall afternoon and realizing you don't need to have everything figured out to belong here. You just have to keep noticing. We live in a world that often mistakes certainty for strength. But in the humanities, we know that strength comes from humility, from being brave enough to say, I don't know, but I want to understand. I want to know. I want to understand. Because that's how progress begins. That's how innovation begins. And that's how belonging begins. Curiosity isn't a distraction from the work of justice and inclusion. It is the work of justice and inclusion. Because every time we ask why, we uncover something deeper, a hidden pattern, an old assumption, a story that needed to be retold. When curiosity becomes part of our culture, empathy becomes part of our systems. And when empathy becomes part of our systems, no one has to fight just to exist. So yes, the human experience is about loafing through life, asking every question we can before we die. It's about refusing to let fear or fatigue make us stop wondering. Because wonder, in the end, is what keeps us alive. It's what turns survival into meaning and meaning into community. And lately, I've been reminded of just how true that is. Many of you already know that my father passed away recently. In the quiet moments that followed, between the arrangements, the remembering, and the ache that comes when the world keeps turning, I found myself reflecting on the questions that loss always brings. Questions about time, about purpose, about what we leave behind when our story meets its final period. But through it all, I've also felt something extraordinary. The kindness, the warmth, and the compassion from the NACHOS community. Your messages, your words, your shared memories, and simple check-ins. They've meant more than I can possibly say. They reminded me that even in grief, we're not alone. That community is not just something we build, it's something that holds us when we cannot hold ourselves. And my father was a curious man. He asked questions right up until the end, not just about how things worked, but about why we do what we do, who we become when life tests us, and how we find joy in a world that can be both beautiful and brutal. He had that kind of rare mind that didn't just accept answers, he turned them over, sometimes literally, and examined their edges and looked for lessons hiding underneath. Even in his final days, his curiosity wasn't dimmed by pain or fear, it was sharpened by it. He wanted to understand the mystery of being alive, why we love, why we lose, why we keep trying when we know everything ends. And I think that's why I carry that piece with me of him. And that's why I think I carry it most of all. That relentless curiosity, that refusal to stop learning, even when the answers are heavy or hard to bear, and especially when they're already known. Terry Pratchett once wrote, "No one is actually dead until the ripples they cause in the world die away." My father believed that line with every fiber of his being. He lived by what we came to call his ripple theory. The idea that every act of kindness, every thoughtful question posed, every moment of genuine openness creates a movement in the world long after we've gone. To him, legacy wasn't measured in big accomplishments, but in subtle echoes, in whispers. The person you listened to, the door you held open, the conversation you sparked. He saw himself not as the center of the pond, but as someone who cast a stone into the still water and trusted the waves to carry forward, who knew the value of life isn't only what you do, but what you set in motion. The song Ripple by Grateful Dead became his favorite. This was a band I introduced him to rather reluctantly, only for him to fall in love with the lines. Ripple in still water when there is no pebble tossed nor wind to blow. He said that's exactly what we aim for. Not noise, not disruption for its own sake, but the gentle effect. The kind of change that doesn't announce itself with trumpets, but with hushes, with echoes, with those quiet moments of connection. So as I reflect on him now, on our work together, and on this NACHOS community he was a part of, I see his ripples everywhere. In the conversations you've shared, the ideas you've nurtured, the way you asked better questions. Because curiosity becomes culture, and culture becomes our own collective ripples. Even now, his ripple is still moving in classrooms, at conferences, in the quiet spaces where one person turns to another and says, I see you. And in that sense, he's not gone. Not yet. Not as long as our ripples continue. And when I think back on what we've explored in this episode, I realize that every thread has been part of the same tapestry. We began with autumn, a season that reminds us that change is not the end of something, but the necessary turning that allows new growth to begin. We talked about letting go, about slowing down, and about trusting the cycles that carry us from one chapter of our lives into the next. And then we looked at what happens when we apply the same rhythm to our collective work, when we allow our communities, our classrooms, and our systems to change, to shed what no longer serves, and to grow something better in its place. The Michigan Disability Empowerment Conference showed us that change doesn't have to be chaotic. It can be creative. It can be collaborative. And we saw what happens when people come together across generations, disciplines, and lived experience to imagine a place where belonging isn't an afterthought, but it is a foundation. The student innovation projects reminded us that curiosity, that simple human impulse to ask why not, is the genuine engine of progress. Each idea, whether a hat, a phrase, or a tag, represented the best of what happens when compassion meets imagination. We talked about humanities, not as an academic field, but as a way of being in the world, a way of moving through life awake to questions, alive to wonder, and open to the possibility that our asking matters as much, if not more, than our answering. And that's what makes this work sacred. The courage to stay curious, even when life feels uncertain. The humility to listen for meaning, even when it arrives in unexpected forms. And then we came home to something more personal. The loss of my father and the lessons he left behind. His belief in the ripple theory, his love of Robert Hunter's words, and his unshakable conviction that the smallest gestures of kindness can travel farther than we can even imagine. His life, like autumn leaves, is proof that beauty and impermanence are not opposites. They're partners. One teaches us how to bloom, the other teaches us how to let go. When I hold all of this together, the season, the conference, the students, the humanities, my father's song, it feels like the same story told in different languages. A story about movement and meaning and the way our ripples overlap to make the world just a little more gentle, a little more just, and a hell of a lot more human. And that's what this work is. And that's what this season asks of us, to keep wondering, to keep creating, to keep sending out ripples of our own in classrooms, in communities, and in every corner of our everyday lives. Because even as the day grows shorter, the light we share only grows stronger. Before we wrap up today, a quick note for my students. I'll be grading your midterms over the coming week. I've seen so much creativity and care in these projects that came through from the conference and beyond, and I can't wait to give each one of your submissions the time and attention they deserve. In the meantime, I want you to take this week to focus on balance, to catch your breath, to work on your other classes' midterms, and to check in with yourselves and your rhythms. Next week, we'll begin looking ahead to your final project. But don't worry, this one won't be foreign territory. The main topic is something you already know plenty about. And if you don't, you'll want to, because the topic is you. That's right, your story, your growth, your understanding of who you are and how you move through the world. The humanities isn't just about studying other people's lives. It's about learning to read your own. So come ready to think deeply, to reflect honestly, and to connect the dots between what we've discussed all semester and the person you are becoming. As we close this week's episode, let's take a moment to breathe and remember what we've learned, or simply what we've learned about ourselves. We've learned that change is not an interruption. It's part of the rhythm of being alive. The falling leaves, the shifting seasons, the quieter light. All of it reminds us that rest is not a retreat and letting go is not loss. It's simply making space for what is next. We learned that community is the soil where growth takes root, whether it's the Michigan Disability Empowerment Conference, a classroom, or a library meeting room. When people come together with openness and imagination, something sacred happens. Possibility begins to bloom. We learned that curiosity isn't a luxury, it's a lifeline. It's what keeps us soft, teachable, and connected. It's what turns innovation into inclusion and information into wisdom. And we learned through the ripples of one life well lived that love, kindness, and genuine curiosity never really die. They move through us, through our work, through every moment of courage and care we offer the world. So as we turn toward a new week, I invite you to carry these truths with you. You are allowed to change. The world may ask you to stay the same, but your growth is your birthright. Like the trees that surrender their leaves, you are allowed to shed what no longer serves you and trust that renewal will come. You belong to a community that sees you, supports you, and believes in your voice. Even when the world feels isolating, remember that someone out there is moved by your presence, by your quiet strength, by your story, by your ripple. Your curiosity is a gift. When you ask questions, real, open, wondering questions, you keep the world alive. You turn frustration into discovery and difference into dialogue. Never underestimate the power of a curious mind paired with a kind heart. The ripples you create matter. Every small act of thoughtfulness, every word of encouragement, every time you choose grace over judgment, it all moves outward. You may never see how far it goes, but trust that it does. And perhaps most importantly, you are still learning, still growing, still becoming. There is no deadline for your development, no finish line for your unfolding. Each day you wake up curious, you are already succeeding. You are part of this story, each and every one of you Nacho Knots, part of the grand unfolding ripple that turns compassion into culture. You are the change in motion, the next verse in the song, the living reminder that humanity is still writing its story. So remember to carry these reflections with you through the coming week. Hold on to a little predictability wherever you can find it. Give yourself the gift of balance, even if it's just a quiet moment in the middle of a busy day. And never, ever, ever stop reaching for joy. Not the loud, showy kind, but the steady kind that grows when you live in alignment with your values, your rhythm, and your community. And that's at the heart of the PB&J framework: predictability, balance, and joy. A recipe for being human. And it's a recipe that's meant to be shared freely. If today's conversation stirred something in you, if you found comfort, inspiration, or even just a question worth sitting with, I invite you to stay connected. Follow Nachos wherever you get your podcasts and join us on social media to keep this ripple going. Leave a comment, share an episode, or tell a friend who might need a reminder that they're not alone in their questions. And if you believe in the work we're doing in creating spaces that affirm neurodivergent lives and celebrate every kind of mind, consider giving to the Humanities 101 Foundation. Your support helps us host conferences like the MDEC. We offer scholarship for students and continue building Michigan and a world where belonging isn't an exception, it's an expectation. You can find all the details at humanities101.org. So until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Rest when you can and where you can. Reflect when you need to and where you need to. And keep asking the questions that make the world a little softer, a little wiser, and a little more human. Because your curiosity, your ripple, it matters. So remember, this has been Nachos, the neuro-affirming conversation hour for outreach and support. I'm Dr. Dutch, reminding you that every brain belongs, every story counts, and every question is worth asking. So we'll see you next time, Nacho Knots.